He turned his back to the crowd, affixed a decorative bandana across his forehead, and pushed his upper lip into the crevice of his gums, bucking out his front teeth. The comic turned back around to face the audience once again, squinting his baby blue eyes and uttering, "Hello, welcome to Benihana. How may I be of service?" This didn't happen on a makeshift stage in a rundown watering hole miles off the highway in a rural part of a red state. It happened in Columbus, Ohio, the 15th largest city in the nation, a city with almost 2 decades of Democratic mayoral rule and one of the country's largest pride festivals. And it didn't happen 70 years ago, but rather 7. And as I sat in the back of the comedy club that night, taking in that set and waiting for my own to come up later in the evening, only one thing bothered me. And it wasn't where I was or when I was or even what the material was.
It was that it killed.
The only thing that's ever really annoyed me about comedy is the tropes. Passed down from comics who had only stale advice to offer to comics who had even less, and printed in how to do comedy books you buy when you're green enough to be willing to pay $9.95 for the possibility of an ounce of insight.
Start strong, end on a laugh, and get a laugh every 12 seconds. Dress one level above the crowd, rule of 3, callbacks, and of course,
the one that was rattling through my head that night, the one that still irks me when it springs to mind even now.
The audience is always right.
The thing I hate about these tropes is the legs they have, the legacy they endure, and the reverence they're given, in something like comedy of all things. An art form that was pioneered by personas like Lenny Bruce. It's just unsettling to see an abstraction created to confront the likes of government and religion taking on rules and dogma of its own. And like the ethos of the lay world, the edicts in comedy are mostly filled with uncalled bullshit.
The audience isn't always right. In fact, they rarely are.
And more importantly, that pronouncement is already crippled on its stance because it assumes the role of a comedy audience is to make a judgment. The role of an audience is to observe. Like it, don't like it. As a performer, that's not really a comedic barometer for me. It seems a logical fallacy on its face.
When they are all in the room together, why would you grant assessment of the art not to the artist, but to the herd of amateurs?
That's what you're working on as a comic. That's why you do as many sets as you can, whenever you can and wherever you can. You want to be able to curate, to know what's good and what's bad, what's funny and what's not. They say the journey of a comic is the trek of finding your voice. But like most comedic parables, it's also just more uncalled bullshit.
You're less finding your voice, and more so training your ear.
The ability to create things measured up against your own calibrated internal yardstick has to be the goal, because it's truly the skill. If guffaws are the goal, then the guy from the previously mentioned story swapping his L's for R's and pantomiming spatula acrobatics is meeting the same bar as George Carlin and Richard Pryor. I don't have contempt for the audience, I just don't have an unabashed reverence for them. And I think following the directive that their opinion is impeccable tangents a performer's journey from perfecting the internal to placating the external. Denying that live performance, like comedy, is different than an art form like painting, which holds almost all of its creative process in solitude, wouldn't be fair. But it's also incorrect to act like they're gulfs apart. What an audience sees is a fraction of the comedic creative process. Before you reveal your conception to them, you've conceived it and refined it in isolation and played it on repeat in the theater of your own mind ad nauseum. An inward audience of one has heard your material exponentially more times than anyone watching from the outside.
Not only is that internal spectator more refined in taste, it is also more seasoned in criticism.
I'd be hypocritical to spend a whole essay railing against tropes and end on a decree of my own, but I have to coalesce this into something succinct at the end. Let's just call it something to think about.
The audience isn't always right, but neither is the performer, because correctness is not the goal. The performer should seek to be true, because honesty is the pinnacle of creation.